Welcome to Global Information Security Society for Professionals of Pakistan.
Assalamu alaikum and good day to everyone. I welcome you all on behalf of Global Information Security Society for Professionals of Pakistan for today's session, where we'll be discussing on CRISC certification. CRISC stands for Certified in Risk and Information Security Controls. Today we'll be discussing on domain 3, which is risk response and mitigation. My name is Mohammad Adnan Khan. And as you can see from the list of credentials that I've been in the business for quite a long time, most of my career was span around infrastructure design, security assessments, implementing cybersecurity solution, and mostly nowadays I'm working on risk management for quite a long time. Risk management, where it's related to risk management activities, framework, strategy, designing the plans, and doing the actual risk assessment. So we already covered two of the domains in previous sessions, and I'll give you in this screen. I'll just give you a brief that risk management CRISC certification, it spans around 4 domains: risk identification, domain 2 as assessment, domain 3 as risk response and mitigation, and in domain 4 we discuss on risk and control monitoring. Okay, now we already discussed on risk identification and risk assessment, right? Then these first 2 domains were more of are the domains where business involvement was lesser. But in today's session, in domain 3, where we will be talking on risk response and mitigation, this is the main phase where business is involved, the full involvement of business is required. So let's move to the next slide. In today's session, we'll be discussing over a few of the topics. First, I will show you brief about exam overview. We'll not go into detail because we already discussed the detail in the first domain. I will talk about some key terms and definitions, which will be very beneficial, very important for the course of this presentation. Why? Because the exam is always is around these major terms. If you are well familiar with these terms and definitions, then it will be very easy to tackle the questions, because the questions will be a bit tricky during the exam. Then we will go into domain 1, very quick overview, domain 2, very quick overview, and then domain 3 will go in depth. And as we know that this whole presentation and this domain is all about risk response, so we will discuss on risk response. Then we will talk about control design and implementations, and then at the end we'll go with few questions and answers. Now, this is a very brief of exam portion coverage. As I told you earlier, that I'll not go into detail on the exam detail, because we already covered it in the exam in the first domain. So we will move to our presentation now. Now, before I start domain 3 discussion, I need to again emphasize few very important things. Why we are discussing it here? Because here we are going to give our reports to management, and when we are preparing the reports, we need to ensure we are going through basic risk management practices when we know that we are following those best practices. Now, first of all, when we are talking about risk, okay, it's all about answering few questions. Okay, what are the questions when we are trying to say what are we trying to achieve? This means business. What business are we doing? Okay, and then we need to see what might affect us as a business. I'm not saying as from my perspective, it should be from the business. Business wants to see what are the things that can affect me negatively or positively. It can be which are the most important ones. Means if we have some risks, we have hundreds of risks, thousands of risks, we need to start segregating them. We need to classify them. We need to see which are the most important ones that we need to look at the right time, because it needs cost, it needs time, it needs resources to handle those risks, to respond to those risks. So we need to categorize them. Now, if you see the first thing we in the first questions is all about building the context of the organization. What might affect me? We already discussed it in first domain. This is related to risk identification. Then we go, which are the most important one, which is this part we already discussed in domain 2 in risk assessment, where we did qualitative, quantitative assessments, and then we went through risk prioritization. Now, then what we should do about it? Now, this what we are going to discuss in this domain, that what type of response the management will take. And then when we implement the control, when we implement the solution, did it really work? Okay. And what has changed? What has changed means, is there after implementing these controls, did anything change? Did any other change occur? And did it really affect on our project? So we will go into all these details in the coming slides. Now, very common and very important key terms are that risk capacity, risk appetite, and risk tolerance. I already discussed it in the previous sessions. Risk capacity is all about the total risk, the total loss that an organization can tolerate, and this is the total amount that you have. Risk appetite is that how much you want to take risk on out of that amount that you have. So if you can see the definition, the amount of risk that an entity is willing to accept. So in easy terms, simply you can understand the difference between risk capacity and risk appetite is that how much you have, how much you can take the risk on, and how much you are willing to take the risk. For instance, you have $100,000, then this is your total amount that you can take risk on, but you don't want to take on $100,000. You want to take only, okay, out of 100,000 I will take risk on 50,000. So this is what we're talking about. 100,000 is my whole amount that I can take the risk, but I'm not willing to take. So I decide, I jot down, I decide, I put a limit on, and that limit is called risk appetite. Okay, now I'm ready to take risk of $50,000, right? Then on the $50,000, okay, now I can see that yes, my limit was 50,000, but if I go a little bit up and down, then I can get benefit of some positive risk. So that is called risk tolerance, right? So risk tolerance is just a deviation from risk appetite. The deviation normally is not a big deviation, it's a very small deviation, so it depends on the business. Now, few more terms which will be very important when you will be when the management is ready to decide to take any response on a risk and they want to take any action. So there are a few things. Anything that exists in universe has a risk. Okay, that risk is also called inherent risk, because in another way, in other words, you can say any risk before control implementation is inherent risk. Okay, so residual risk is that when you implement a control and then there is some certain risk remains, that comes into residual risk. Okay, normally residual risks are not something you just forget about it or you just ignore it. No, residual risk goes into different category, and that needs to look at after a while, and every now and then risk assessor has to look at it, the business has to look at it to see when we can fix it, when they have budget, when they have resources, or if that risk is going to cost dearly on the business, then we need to take decision. Secondary risk is that if we put a response on a risk and it generates it brings some other risks as well. For example, if you apply patches on a system, on a Windows system, then when you apply a patch, okay, it brings up another vulnerability. So we need to keep on ensuring that if we are deploying certain patches on Windows machine, we need to make sure that after deploying the patches, we need to run the patching again. We need to see if there are new patches available to counter those new vulnerabilities. Now, during the risk identification, it was a quite straightforward domain where we discussed about, we were just collecting the information. You can see we collect the information, we identify the asset. Actually, in risk identification as a whole, what we do is that we start collecting the information. We collect, when we are saying, when I'm saying we start collecting the information, we are saying we collect the information about assets, we collect the information about the business processes, we collect the information about vulnerabilities, threats, and then we build our scenario, then we identify the stakeholder, because each and every asset should have an owner, each and every risk should have an owner. Now, when we talk about threat and vulnerabilities, definitely there won't be an owner, because we formulate, we have a formula to identify risk, which is threat multiplied by vulnerability, right? So we should have an owner of it. For risk, we should have owner of assets, and information collection is done in this domain. Then we go to risk scenarios. When we identify stakeholder, then we build a risk register, which we already discussed in previous domain. I encourage you to go back to those domains and see the details of those samples of risk registers as well. And then one of the most important aspect, one of the most important tasks in any risk management, or in a big term in GRC, governance, risk and compliance domain, is awareness and communication. We need to communicate. We identify the risk, we assess the risk, then we need to communicate to correct stakeholders, and user awareness has to be there, and people should know that what risks are there and related. It shouldn't be very open. Relevant stakeholder should be aware of the risks and what they have to do if this risk occurs. In domain 2, we discussed about the assessment of the risk, and we went through different techniques and methodologies, how to do the assessment. Delphi method, cause and effect, bow tie. There were certain other methods were there. And then we discussed on BIA, we discussed on RTO, RPO. One of the most important part of risk, second domain, is risk analysis and risk evaluation. Okay, and then we went to qualitative. When we do risk analysis, we talk about qualitative and quantitative assessments, the analysis, and then we went through identifying the current controls. We did the gap assessment. Then see, one of the most important thing we always have to do is to do the gap assessment. When we talk about gap assessment is just simply the current situation and the desired situation, or current situation or the previous situation. We can see that previously we were having this many accounts, and now we are having for example, we were having 10 accounts, now we are having 20 accounts, so there is a gap of 10. Or this is one type of gap assessment when you're doing the user access gap assessment. When you're trying to see gap assessment of compliance, that we need to see that compliance tells us to reach at, for example, that we need to have 10 policies related to our organization, but we have only 5 policies, so there is a gap of 5 policies. So gap assessment is not only forward direction, it can be from the backward direction. That means, okay, now gap assessment is one of the most important thing we discussed. And then again, in every domain, I'll keep on emphasizing and keep in mind that in the exam you will have questions that what is the most important thing in risk assessment is the communication and documentation. So again, communicate IT assessment result to the relevant stakeholder. This is, if you see it as an option, most of the situation, that is the answer of it. So risk assessment, quick overview was, as I told you, risk analysis. We discussed quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis. Qualitative analysis is all about, like, we don't put the dollar value. We normally go with the high, medium, low rating, or maximum semi-quantitative, which we said if the value is 1, 2, 3, then it will be, for example, low, medium, high. And quantitative, we put a dollar value. Then we go to risk evaluation. One of the most important thing that you should remember when you are attempting the serious examination, that risk evaluation comes after risk analysis. Why I'm saying, I mean, you can say in a way, of course it will come after risk analysis. Why? Because how you will do the ranking of the list when you don't have the analysis ready? When you know that, see, first of all, if you take one by one, in qualitative analysis, you say that the risk is low, medium, and high. In quantitative, you will not do the quantitative analysis, which requires financial calculations and a lot of time. It requires a lot of time, a lot of expertise. You go with maybe with only critical risks. Then when you already identified which are your critical risks, and you want to do, you have done your analysis, qualitative, quantitative, then you do the ranking. Okay, then after you do the ranking, as per your ranking, you put the risk prioritization, and these are the recommendation and suggestion that we present to management, and the management take decision, which we'll be discussing in our domain 3, risk response and mitigation. Now, Again, risk domain 3 is all about business, as they need to take decisions on what to do with the identified and assessed risks, right? Now, when we are talking about aligning the risk response with business objectives, see, we are here to support the business by securing the assets and informations, which means we need to align our risk responses with business objectives. And how to do that, we'll be discussing in the coming slides. See, in short, this is mainly business responsibility to inform. This is our responsibility to inform business what actions need to be taken, and this is business's responsibility to take the action, to decide which action they are okay with. Now, let's go with the in this slide they were discussing about. In this slide we are just mentioning that when we are finalizing the risk assessment report to be given to the management, we go with we ensure that we have assessed risk level mentioned in the report. We should indicate the priority of each risk. We should include the recommendation, because those are the recommendations that the business will rely on to take the decision. Okay, and then of course when we finalize this report, then we need to communicate with the relevant stakeholders. We give it to relevant stakeholder, which are the business again, and then they take the responsibility to do what to look at our recommendation and see, do they want to take the action or no. Now, what are the common risk response options? These are the 4 common risk response options, and let me start from the bottom of the list, and there is a reason behind it. Why? You will understand, because risk acceptance and mitigation comes almost at the in line to each other. Risk avoidance means if you see a risk, if the business sees a risk that if they take an action, if they take an action or they implement a control, that the cost of that control outweighs the benefit, then business will not business will see that if it's too expensive to do a business in this manner, that the cost is too high, then the person should avoid. The management sometimes decides not to take the risk, and they said, okay, we will go with we will not do the business. So risk avoidance is a bit it's normally risk avoidance. It doesn't happen if you have proper planning. If people who are bringing the business to you, they are already aware of what type of business is running we are working with, what are the business risk appetite, risk capacity. So what we do, risk avoidance is just that exiting the activities or conditions for which the business will not get much benefit. Risk transfer is what is just transferring the liability, of financial liability to the third party. Okay, keep in mind that still, who is responsible for the risk? Risk owner is always the business. Normally when we transfer we do the risk transfer technique when the impact is very high, but probability is extremely low. For example, if you are in a country where you have never heard that there can be a earthquake, so but there is a chance, very mere chance, so you will take what you call the insurance to take care of this risk. Risk acceptance is that management's call. First of all, risk acceptance is what you are telling the management. You have your machines are not having antivirus. Antivirus is very important because it can stop the spread of malware and antivirus. But business is saying, my business is small, I don't want to spend money over it. So, but you know that this is risky, so you need to ensure that you inform the business what the risk is all about, and then the business accepts it. I am ready to accept the risk, don't implement it. So no further actions is required after the acceptance at that level. What is risk mitigation? Now, why now I will tell you the reason why I started from bottom of the list. Risk mitigation means you implement a control. So the organization or the business comes and tells you, okay, you want antivirus to be installed, I have this much budget, I will tell, and you can go ahead and install. We can implement the control within this range. So we as a risk assessor, we tell them, okay, you can implement. we recommended you to install antivirus, and then we suggested you to install 2 firewall, but you are saying the budget is not good, so we will install, then business will say, okay, just install 1 firewall and 1 antivirus. So that means when we are telling them no, to implement 2 firewalls, they agreed with 1 firewall and antivirus. So that means they are ready to mitigate the risk, but they accepted the risk of not having the second firewall. This is the most important point. The business knew it that they had to have a second firewall because they were having, for example, a web application, or they were having some transaction in outside world, and but they still, because of budget constraint, they didn't want to take it. So they will know that we are ready to mitigate the risk by implementing 2 controls, but the third one we are accepting the risk. So these are the most common actions, risk response actions. Now, what are the analysis technique? Again, I think we don't need to spend much of the time on this slide, because this is we already discussed that business takes decision on cost benefit analysis, that the amount of money I'm spending to mitigate a risk, am I going to get benefit that will not like be money wise lesser than the cost? No. So always the benefit of implementing control should outweigh the cost. It will not make sense to implement a control that will have too much cost and the benefit you are getting is very less. Okay, for example, you have a very famous example that risk managers give is about the car and in the tires. For example, you purchase a car in a country that you won't be staying for a long time, and the car's price is, for example, just say $20,000 or $10,000. Okay, and $10,000, but you're ready to and the when you are going to sell the car, at that time you'll be selling it on 8,000. But will it be reasonable that you start spending money on the decoration of this car, that you'll be changing the tires and some more interior, that the car's price goes to from $10,000 to $25,000? Then at the time you'll be selling the car, you won't be getting the that money. So you have to get okay, I'm gonna change the tires. Let me change the tires to a way that I get the benefit, plus I don't lose much of the benefit out of it. Okay, so when we are doing cost benefit analysis, actually there are so many factors that comes in when we are doing the cost benefit analysis. And the cost, for example, when you're talking about the cost for the business, it's upfront cost covered, like evaluation of solutions, cost of the control, cost of training, and there's many things. When we are talking about ongoing cost, we are talking about license cost, maintenance cost, cost of support, and technical assistance. When we are talking about the benefits, as we already discussed, benefits are different. As you can see, increased revenue, decreased expenses, better security, trust from the for example, the customer, faster recovery. There are so many ways that we need to look at, that we can get benefit out. Now, when we talk about return of investment, now here is a very important term. Return of investment in security is a bit difficult. First of all, what is return of investment? Let us discuss over it. When we are calculating ROI associated with any implementation of a control, why is it so difficult? Because it depends on predicting the likelihood of a successful attack. I'm implementing an antivirus and I'm expecting that a virus attack happens, and then our antivirus stops it. Then I will see, okay, it happens, and then it stopped it. But it's difficult when we are talking about in security world. Yes, it will be logical to it will not logical, it will be easier to do the ROI when we are, for example, we are an application development company, and then we establish a small company, and we establish a data center where we brought some computer, then we brought some staff, then we do sales and marketing. Then we can do ROI, that okay, I'm investing this much money, so to sell this and this software, how much time it will take me to recover all the money back, and I will be on a break even, and then when will I start getting more benefit out of the software. Okay, it will be easier because these are tangible. When we talk about ROI, return of investment on security, it will be very difficult. So by the way, sometimes in some cases in security they refer ROI as ROSI, return of security investment. Okay, so and normally in security field we mostly depend on cost benefit analysis, where and the business impact analysis, of course that's a bit techy. So in cost benefit analysis help us to gauge which control we need to implement, which solution we need to implement. Now we are done with what we are done with the cost benefit analysis. That means now we need to develop our risk action plan. Okay, when we are developing our risk action plan, remember the ultimate responsibility, the ultimate decision on risk response lies on the risk owner. This is why in the beginning in all the domains, especially in risk identification, we were saying we need to identify asset, we need to identify risk, and we need to assign an owner. Okay, now risk practitioner, what is my job, what is your job, what is job of risk practitioner is just consultancy in an advisory. And when we are the decision plan to implement the control is based on many factors. For example, you can see what is the current level of risk, what are the laws and regulations, are there any ongoing projects, are there strategic plans or management priorities, availability of staff. There are many things. But if we go into, for example, the risk, when we are developing the risk action plan, right, we need to see, we need to start from risk identification, right? We first go when we establish the context of the organization, then we did our risk identification phase, we went through that. If you see here, we are talking about risk scenario, right? And then we did the risk analysis, which was our second domain, where we also defined a risk map or risk matrix, where we mentioned that which are the high risk, which are the low risk. And then we came down to third domain, where we are going to decide the risk action plan. Here we need to see what is the risk appetite of the organization, right? Is it exceeding the appetite? If it is within the limit, okay, any risk, certain risks might happen, but they are within our risk appetite, then this is fine, because we have some compensating control, we have some control there to select it. But if it is exceeding it, then we need to see, we need to take the risk response plan. Then as we already discussed in the previous domain, in the previous slides, that there are few options that we can say: avoid the risk, mitigate the risk transfer, and accept. And then what are the factors that we'll be seeing? How, for example, we have an application, our environment is exposed to outer world, then we need to look into more stringent risk the controls, the more stringent controls to protect our environment, right? For example, if our application is only internal, then we need to see, okay, no, we don't need to have two WAFs or web application firewall, or we don't need to have one or many and a few antivirus software, EDR software. Just give an example. We need to see how the risk response parameters are okay within the line, and we normally categorize them based on the risk exposure factors as well. Then when the business is ready to take the decision, and they are ready to take the risk response, then it goes to prioritize the risk, which ones of them they will take action first. And then risk action plan with the risk responses means this plan goes into execution, and there is a monitoring phase. Okay, now see, business process review. Business process review, I'll not go into more details in it, because we already covered it in risk identification phase. Because when in the beginning, keep in mind that when you start any risk assessment activity, you start with identifying the risk by identifying assets, identifying the vulnerability, the threats, and the impact, and then you review the business process at that phase as well, right? Why? Because you need to go through the business process to know what exactly they do. Then you are in a good position to give them the solution that they require. So why we are discussing it here, that's a different reason. If you see, for the example, I'll read from the slide: a business process review examines the effectiveness and efficiency of an organization meeting its goal. Who does it? Keep in mind, business process review, when we are reviewing the business process, you must involve the experts. the business owners, the subject matter experts. It's not you that you just read one document and we go and we discuss with them. No, we need to involve business owners in it, because they are assigned as an owner, like a technical owner is there, like a risk owner is there, control owner is there. So business process owner must be involved in those meetings. And during the business process review, what are the purposes? Is to identify what are the problems and issues in the current process. For example, there is a login process, there is a putting the credit card information. If somebody is entering the credit card information, we need to ensure, are we following the regulations, are we following the PCI DSS. If we are talking about healthcare information, then are we in line with the HIPAA. So and we do certain gap assessment, we implement our roadmap. Okay, these are the for example, one certain parts of the project are done in this phase, so we need to cover them, we need to protect them by implementing the controls in this during this phase. Then we move to the second phase. So we need to put some kind of a roadmap, and then we assign responsibilities, accountabilities of those tasks and projects, and then we review the feedbacks and we keep on monitoring it. So again, as I told you, I'll not go into detail because that's we already discussed it. So when we are talking about business process review, in this one, it's a very comprehensive and small slide. When we said we document and evaluate the current business process, we identify the potential changes, the schedule and implement the changes, and the feedback, and then we moved into feedback and evaluation. When we are doing the document evaluation, we need to list the critical processes, supply chain processes, the current issues and current problems, and then we establish the baselines actually when we are doing this documentation and evaluation. So when we move to identify the changes, okay, this is why what does this mean? This is sometimes misleading. We need to understand that when we are identifying potential changes, we mean that we need to validate the changes, we need to validate the proposed changes with the management and obtain their approval. Okay, and how do we do that? We use focus group techniques, and there are many other techniques that we discuss in the risk identification. And during the schedule and implement changes, we just want to make sure that we are designing in our risk assessment plan, risk response plan. We are designing the changes as per business approvals, and we identify dependencies, communication with stakeholders. At the end, then we go with the feedback and evaluation, where we have user satisfaction and then process of improvement. Okay, now again, what is this slide is all about? It's all about documentation and communication. Again, from the exam point of view, I recommend all of you to keep few things in mind always when you're answering. Documentation and communication is very important. What is your role in risk management, risk assessment activities? Is advisory. Who is the ultimate responsible for the risk? Is the business. So these are few things. It will be very helpful if you are answering the question. Then control, design and implementation category. See, controls are having there are different types of control. There are different categories. Now we are talking about categories. What type of different categories? Administrative control and management, or as known as, or you can say management control, then logical and technical control, and physical control. Physical controls are easy. You can see when you're talking about fences, you're talking about locks. When you're talking about administrative control, right? Administrative controls, it's easy. It's something related to on paper. So what are the examples of administrative control? We are talking about policies, we are talking about procedure, we are talking about background checks, and data classification. Then we go into technical controls. Technical controls are more of like what you're implementing in your data center, in your machines, your passwords, your antivirus, your IDS, your firewalls. And then you go to physical control. As I told you, it's fences, motion detector, video cameras, fences, locks. Okay, now those were categories. Now these are the types. When you implement any control, in which type does it fall? You can get a question in the examination. For example, you are putting a signboard. What type of security control is that? Is it a recovery? No, it will not recover anything. It's just a signboard. It is trying to discourage the violator. to attempt an illegal action. So like this is called a deterrent control, to discourage it. Preventive control, it stops. For example, you have a fence, you put a fence, then what does it happen, what does it do? Uh, uh, it tries to stop the unwanted action. Okay, then we have corrective action, then we have detective action. Detective action is like antiviruses, your SIM solutions. Directive actions are again which are like posters, okay, security policies. And corrective actions are like network isolation is there, you have revoking the access. And recovery is like backup, it's very easy, backup and recover, fault tolerance, these things. And some of the controls can act as detective and corrective as well, right? Like for example, you have an advanced level of EDR, it can detect that there is a virus attack, it can also take some actions. So you have SIM solution, you have source solution, there are some advanced categories of controls which can take multiple actions. So they fall into different type of security controls. Now normally in your organization we develop this kind of table where we can show them that okay, certain control we for our application from managerial perspective. For example, we remove the access if some illegitimate access, action happens, that we will just go ahead. What corrective action we will take? We will just remove the access. What is technical action? We will have network isolation, we will try to make sure that end users and the management people are different in different subnets and subnets in different VLANs. And physical control, we can have, say, we have closed fire doors, and we can close fire doors in case of fire. Okay, so now we will this simple picture, it just it just tells us a little bit about each control, how does it roam around threat, event, and vulnerability and impact. For example, I'll tell you, we'll just discuss very briefly. For example, a deterrent control, what does it do? Does it affect anything on the impact? No, it cannot impact. You have for example, it can just go ahead and reduce the likelihood of the event, right? Deterrent control, what we discuss about deterrent control? If here we are saying, for example, a policy. Now how come a policy can reduce the impact? It cannot reduce the impact, because if an event happens, it cannot reduce it. To reduce the impact, you need to have some preventive controls, right? And the, for example, detective control, if an control detects that a vulnerability is exploited and the attack has happened, so it cannot reduce the attack, it is just detecting it. So how it roam around is that detective control, it discovers the threat event, right? It triggers the preventive control. So this is very good, it's a very good picture. It's from the ISACA manual, series manual, which elaborates very easily what the compensating control can do, what the corrective control can do. It cannot go ahead and stop the event, but what it will do, it will reduce the impact by recovering it. How if you have a proper recovery plan. Okay, now let's move on the this slide is also very actually this slide is held a whole, this cannot be discussed in a short presentation, because this itself is a big chapter to cover. Now if you see, when we are implementing the controls, okay, when you're talking about matrix and these things, we are talking about business process reviews. We already discussed about it, that business process review involves knowing the sensitive information, such as do we have PHIM, personal health information, are we protecting that information, do we have any alteration or deletion in the high importance data, sensitive data must be masked, it should be hidden. So these are the things we need to refer to some regulations, some standard that we are under them. And then we go into information security controls, where we'll be discussing about that, where we'll be discussing, do we have the proper change control, we have the system authorization, we have asset inventory, do we have the configuration management. What do we mean by that? See, when we are doing all these kind of checks, we are trying to do what? We are trying to reduce the impact, we are trying to make business more smooth and more secure at an acceptable level, right? And these are all the category that we go. For example, third party management, we need to make sure that when we hire a third party, right, then we need to have a proper SLA, we need to have an NDA, because third party can see our can access our confidential data. So we need to do we have a certain NDA, do we have a certain SLA, what is the timeline of this project, are they following the timeline, do they have a change management, do they have a security solution? So third party management has to be taken care. Then we have a data management, that we need to make sure, do we have DR system, do we have the data privacy laws, are we following them, do we have the encryption there, do we have the backup solution, do we have tape drives, I mean, it all depends on that. See, these are all these things that we mentioned here: third party management, data management, identity and access management, business continuity. All these things we cover in our risk assessment report. At the end, when we have a risk assessment report, we cover all these things. It depends on which control or which process or which part of the business we are targeting. For example, we are looking at critical application running on our data center. So we need to ensure that all the data within that application is secure. If it is having credit card information, then are we following the PCI DSS? Or for example, do we have a proper backup? Do we have a disaster recovery site in case some disaster happens? So we go and start looking into our business continuity plan and our disaster recovery plan. So and see, all these are normally, or these are comes under information security architecture, like operating system, application, and databases. So now let's go into system control design and implementation testing. What we are discussing here, we are discussing here that when we are designing any system, any application, we need to ensure that all the information which is inside the application is secure, encrypted, masked, or we have a segregation. Is the application heavy enough, that it is strong enough that it can handle our testing? Fuzzing, for example, which tests the limits. Do we have environment separation, that production and development and quality or UAT, are they different, or we are running production and development at the same time, which is a big flaw. And this is one of the major thing in some of the banks and some of the organizations. They will never allow this. Why? Because production environment should be accessed by only critical business employees or the authorized people which are strictly monitored. And development environment is to be used by the developers. It can be third party developer, it can be a vendor, it can be internal stuff, but these are the people who are developing the application. When they develop the application, then it goes under reviews. For example, if you're developing the application, you need to have a developer another developer, like a peer review. He should go and review the source code, and he should be accountable, okay, to do what? To follow the organizational coding standard. That means organization should have the coding standards, and this the developer, when he is developing it, first of all, he should follow it. But even if he did follow, to validate it, we need to have a source code review team. That team should go ahead and review the source which has been developed by the developer, and then they go into different tests, and they measure what are the things that are not in line with the organization coding standards, and then they fix it. And then then we go into integration testing, system testing, which is user acceptance testing, and quality assurance. User acceptance, that when you have application ready, you want to deploy it into production, that you want to see that if your users are okay with it. So you take a certain percentage of users, you assign it to them, you ask them to start using this application. They use the application, and then they give their feedback. Okay, maybe by this way we can see the performance of the application, we can see if there are any security flaws, if there are any coding flaws. So this is very important phase. Quality assurance and user acceptance is very important. So we should always have, before going to production, from development we should go into quality assurance and user acceptance, then we move into production. Now okay, now we are done with what after the final test, and the after the final test has been conducted, implementation is scheduled, right? Now there are three very common the common changeover methods used for the transition from one system to another. What are the three common techniques? Is that failover, parallel, and abrupt. Now we will be discussing about parallel changeover. During the parallel changeover, we do what? Both the systems are running at the same time. It's very good in one way because you have the chance to test and everything that the systems are running. If it's just both systems are running, and you can do tests, whatever you implement in one system, you can also implement on another one. If it doesn't work, you have the up and running system. But what is the downside of this? What is the disadvantage of it? Is that the cost is doubled. You have two similar environments running. That means you will be having double licenses. You will be having people concentrating on two environments, and the administrative uh, um, uh, efforts are double. So and there is another issue dilemma, is that is the data consistent, because people will be accessing both. Sometimes they are accessing one environment, the other time they are accessing the other environment. So to fix that, maybe you'll be having a solid replication method, mirroring method, maybe not even replication, the live mirroring method might be used, but it's very costly. So it's if you want to optimize the test reliability, then you have to spend a lot of money on it. The second one is phase changeover. Phase changeover is also very common changeover, that you go module by module, or that, for example, you are removing the hard drives from one machine to another. So you can, if they are they're running in RAID, you remove one hard drive, you put it on the other one, then you go to the other hard drive, then you go put it to the new machine. But this way it takes time, and the two machines are again running. You are utilizing resources, you are utilizing the operational cost, you are utilizing the licenses, double licenses. Data consistency again can be an issue when you're talking about application, because both the machines will be live. So but again, the major benefit, the advantage of this phase failover is that you have greater options to test the reliability. Okay, and if you implement one module of the application, for example, now let's talk about application. You have 10 modules and you implement in only one module, but the both applications are running. So what will happen if that module fails? It will not affect the other modules. You can go back and fix that first module, the other module will keep on running. So the impact on the entire system will be reduced. And the abrupt model is means that you just shut down one full environment, one full system, and you bring up the other system. Very common example is that, for example, when you go to Office 365 migration, normally Microsoft gives you an option to do full cutover completely, or you go with the hybrid model. But in the hybrid model, you have to utilize more licenses, more resources, and more expertise. The administrative staff will be looking at the on-prem application, and then they'll be looking at the cloud as well. So they need the different type of expertise as well. But if you go with the cutover, that means immediately your on-prem will be down and your cloud will be live. And but there is a downtime during this time, but the advantage is what is generally very quick failover, and no need to maintain two production environment at the same time. And so user will be from user's perspective, it will be very easy, because they are pointing always to one environment, not the two environment, and you don't need to inform them. Now we are see, before your some data was there, and some data in the old environment, and some data in the new environment. You don't need to inform them. Okay, now since when we are done with this phase, the cutover and this thing, then it comes system rollback plan, and then you have to post implementation review and project closeout. Now, what do I mean by this? See, when you design an application, when you do the risk assessment, okay, you are actually doing a risk assessment of a project or an application. So you need to make sure that when you do the risk assessment, you did the identification, you did the assessment, when you are planning the risk response plan. In the risk response plan, we already went through business process review. We knew that what type of migration technique we need to do, we need to take, are we going with parallel or no, or are we going with the abrupt changeover? Then we see that, do we have a proper fallout plan? Do we have a rollback plan? And in case something fails, what is the next plan? Do we have a backup? Do we have the support from the external vendor? Do we have an SLA from a vendor? And then this is very important. Then it comes a post implementation review, which is lesson learned. When you have implementation done, what does post implementation review is? It's all about documentation. You need to do, you need to document in the lesson learned, okay, and you need to see what were the things missing, what were the things went wrong, why the project got delayed, why it was ahead of time, what are the new things that we gain out of this project, and at the end, project closeout. When we are talking about project closeout, keep in mind, project closure means what? That project closeout should include verification that the project sponsor is satisfied with the deliverable. What does that mean? See, I will give you one real-time example. Scenario is that when we do the risk assessment, we do the kickoff meeting, project opening meeting, and then at that time, business owners are involved, technical owners are involved. Then we go with all our risk assessment activities. We go to identification with the business owner, technical owner. Then we do the assessment on our own. Maybe sometime we go to them for their assessment. Sometime we need to get their advice on some of the things because they are the business. Then we go to risk response. When we are done with the risk response, okay, then again, when we are done with our risk assessment activities, we need to do the closure meeting. In the closure meeting, we should again involve the business owners and technical work to tell them that this is what our findings are, this is our assessment at this level, your application is vulnerable to this level, your infrastructure is having these issues, and these are the controls already implemented. What is the gap between those controls? What should be implemented as per organization's policy or as per compliance regulations, whatever this organization comes into under? Then when we tell them, then they should agree. At least they should agree that, okay, these are the things we agree, and then we discuss on how to fix those issues. Then it goes to the second phase, where it goes into fixing the these findings. And but here, when we are talking about at this phase of the domain, we are talking about that business should be aware of our recommendations, and they take actions according to our recommendations and as per their risk acceptance criteria, their appetite. Okay, so before we end up this presentation, I need to tell you some very important things from the examination point of view, is that who is the ultimate owner of the control? It's always the higher management. Okay, who is the risk owner? Ultimate decision, the risk owner is always the management, as high as possible, right? Because when you're talking about the business, you need to ensure that somebody who is at the higher level, who runs the business, he should be risk owner, and ultimate decision of risk response lies to the risk owner. And if we prepare a report, we put our recommendation, we put our control recommendations and our remediation recommendation, then we present it to management. Then management, from the management, the person who is the risk owner should take the risk, decide for the risk response, and then he will be accountable for that. He took the decision based on maybe regulation, maybe due to the pressure of the more projects, or maybe he wanted to finish the project quickly, or maybe there was a cost issue. So he should be held responsible and accountable for that. And at the end, updated documentation is the key of any risk management or compliance projects or project management. Even in project management, when you talk about it, you talk about that updated documentation is key. And when you talk about compliance, when we talk about compliance, in compliance there is it's an audit. It is an audit factor, and it's one of the audit criteria that are the documentation updated as per the agreed time interval. So yes. And what are the responsibilities of risk practitioner? Is just we need to do assessment, and our role is advisory. Again, I'm telling you, when you are answering the questions in the exam, keep in mind here that your role is is advisory. You need to do only assessment. And who is the accountable for loss? Is the risk practitioner accountable for the loss? Keep in mind, no, it's a big no. He is not responsible for the loss. It's the business. Okay, with this actually I end my presentation, and here are some sample questions and answers for your to test you. For example, the first question there: risk management programs are designed to reduce the risk to do what? At the point at which it benefit exceeds the expenses, or at the level it's too small to be measurable, at the rate of return and equal to the current cost of capital, or level of enterprise is willing to accept. I think it's a very pretty straightforward question, and I think every one of you would be it will be very easy for you to answer, and it's an answer D. Yes, we always discuss that we implement any control or any program, risk management program is there to reduce the risk to the level acceptable to the enterprise. Second question: in the risk management process, a cost benefit analysis is mainly performed to do what? As part of an initial risk assessment, as part of risk response planning, during the information during an information asset valuation, or when insurance is calculated for risk transfer. Now this is, I think it's an easy question, but it's a little bit tricky because you can see two of the answers are near to it. But again, if you focus on the key terms and the keywords, it's easy. Cost benefit analysis, right? And then as part of risk response planning, no, this is done before. Now if you see that, yes, it's part of risk response planning. Why it's a part of risk response planning is when in risk identification you identified the risk, in risk assessment you did the assessment, and during the third domain we kept on discussing on cost benefit analysis. And this is where we this is the area where you have to focus on the key terms. See, if you go to the first part as a risk assessment, we cannot do the cost benefit analysis because business is not here to discuss over it. We are right now during the assessment, we just do the assessment as per the assessor point of view. And then during the risk asset valuation, that's again you're talking about the first two domains. Okay, when let's go to the third question. The system backup and restore produces can best be classified as what? Technical control, detective control, corrective, or deterrent. I think it cannot. Do you think it's a deterrent? No, deterrent, we mean we are trying to discourage the guy. So we are talking about backup and restore. Backup and restore means after the fact. That means something has already happened and now we are going to fix it. That means we are going to correct it. Okay, with this, thank you very much everyone for joining this presentation, and I hope it will be very helpful for your examination point of view. Again, some critical note that I mentioned during the presentation, it should be very helpful for you for the exam. Keep in mind, and good luck. Thank you very much.